Oh, for a muse of fire that would ascend the highest heaven and invention, a kingdom for a stage, princes to act, monarchs too. Behold the swelling scene. Hello, my name is Joshua Matthews, and this is my presentation for Sterling College's senior seminar for my senior thesis, which is called The Need to Nourish the Imagination for Classroom Higher Learning. Of course, what I was reading just now was Shakespeare's opening lines in Henry V through his chorus in the prologue. Throughout my paper, I use Shakespeare's chorus as an example or a metaphor of a teacher who uses the imagination in the classroom. The metaphor, therefore, being that the stage being a classroom and the chorus being a teacher who uses the imagination. My thesis is that I hold the view that the more students' imaginations are engaged in the classroom, the more opportunity they have to build higher understanding. This is expressed through an A and a B, where I break this down. I believe that nurturing the imagination in the classroom will help lead to higher intelligence. This is seen through my 5 theorists that I present throughout my paper, how I believe that these theorists' ideas illustrate that nurturing the imagination does lead to higher forms of intelligence. And then B, that the importance the imagination plays in the learning process should be explored by future curriculum. And that is expressed through my part 2 of my body, which is the application. How I would apply these ideas and these theories of the imagination in the classroom and how I would apply them into my curriculum, particularly in maybe a reading lesson for upper elementary students. The first theorist that basically is the prime theorist here would be Samuel Taylor Coleridge and his theory of the imagination. Coleridge is famous for presenting that the imagination has 2 primary modes of a process, the primary mode and then the secondary mode. Coleridge is famous for also theorizing that the imagination is perhaps the highest form of intelligence. To go along with this, I have Yoling Hatsu in her article, The Effects of Creative Personality and Psychological Influences on the Imagination. She retitled Coleridge's primary imagination as the reproductive mode of the imagination, and then took Coleridge's secondary imagination and retitled it the creative mode of the imagination. Throughout my paper, specifically in my application, I'm going to be talking about why our instruction in class should target the reproductive mode of the imagination, and why it should also target the creative mode of the imagination. That students should be reproducing images and creatively organizing those images throughout the instruction to help build to their understanding, to build interest in what they're learning, and then to build higher intelligence. The 4 theorists that's in the part 1 of my body would be Paget, Cole, Ricoeur, and Vygotsky, and these are summarized in Tiana Zaitin's article called Imagination as Expansion of Experience. And she'll take these 4 theorists who basically take this idea of imagination and how it applies into the classroom. Paget, he had a negative view of the imagination in the classroom. His view is that, okay, imagination can help fill in the gaps, but it also might fill in wrong information, and that younger children are going to have problems distinguishing from truthful facts and false information, and therefore could be building a foundation of falsehood in their understanding. So he believed that imagination would decrease with age, and that later on in instruction that they would be using reason or higher adaptive thinking capacities in instruction. So he agrees with Plato, for example, who believed that imagination is the lowest form of intelligence. This is contradictory to Coleridge, who believed it was the highest. Paget agrees with Plato and believed that there are better modes of thinking and of knowledge in the brain to help understand and build past connections and experiences, and that would not be the imagination. Okay, Cole, he is different. He disagrees with Paget. He believes that play and the imagination and imaging are very crucial and helpful for the learning process because they fill in the gaps of missing information. Zeiton illustrates this as with a comic book. Comic books have panels of information, and they don't give you the full information, and it's up to the reader to use their imagination to fill in the gaps between the panels. Cole believed that this is exactly what's taking place in the learning experience, that students are constantly on a subconscious level filling in gaps of information, missing information. Ricoeur, he took the imagination, and the example that he used is metaphor, which is exactly what I did throughout my paper, using the metaphor of Shakespeare's chorus in Henry V as a metaphor for the teacher and for the stage as a metaphor of the classroom. And he basically held that, to understand and interpret metaphors require higher intelligence and therefore require higher imagination. So that was his example that he used. It's a very good example. I just don't have time in this presentation to really go into that. But essentially the idea being that to write a poetic, complex metaphor in simile requires high intelligence and high imagination. And then likewise, to read and interpret and to understand those metaphors and similes and complex language and poetic language also requires higher intelligence and higher imagination. Without that, you can't even read or interpret what's going on in the metaphor. The last guy that Zeiton and I am going to agree with the most is Lev Vygotsky. When it came to the imagination in the classroom, he basically essentially is going to hold that the imagination not only fills in the gaps of missing information and requires higher intelligence like Ricoeur, but he also believed that the imagination doesn't just fill in gaps of missing information, it adds and expands to our learning experience, okay? Creating zones of proximal development, okay? That the imagination can actually help us to understand more and complex ideas and add to our learning experience. And he was a great proponent for the arts because he believed that the arts, such as drama, poetry, art, and dancing, all of this helped to add to the learning experience and add to things, expanding experience instead of just defining experience. Lastly, in my application, I basically take Paget claimed that the imagination could detour the learning process if it's unstructured. I therefore pose, just like how Shakespeare used chorus, if we used our language and strategies to help structure the imaginative process that helps students' thinking and image-making capabilities in a structured way instead of just letting it run wild and be chaotic, but if we structured it, then couldn't this actually help lead to a better understanding of what we are learning and actually potentially lead to higher intelligence? I do this in three main ways. Mainly, I'm going to take Coleridge's primary or Hutsu's reproductive imagination. And I'm going to hold that students should imagine throughout the learning experience, whether that be being presented visuals or whether that be using their imaginations to think about what's going on, or as they're reading, they don't just read words, but they can picture what's going on. And lastly, that they have a way to reproduce those images, whether that be in like a story map or a character map or drawings in their journals. That would be a use of the primary reproductive form of the imagination. There's the interact phase. This would be in the secondary or creative mode of the imagination, and basically that's using their imaginations to interact with their learning experience, that they become a participant of what they're learning, and that could basically be through creative journaling, creative discussion, or performance. The last form of secondary and creative imagination in curriculum in the classroom I hold would be the inspiration phase. This could be at the end of the unit where they actually get to produce some type of project that demonstrates how they have been impacted from what they learned, and it demonstrates it in a very creative way, whether it be a poster, a play that they've written, an essay that they've written, all these different examples on how to produce and put in a hands-on experience in a creative, artistic, hands-on way to demonstrate what they have learned. And these essentially are how I would use what the theorist presented in the primary and the secondary in the classroom. And my conclusion would be, lastly, if educationally strengthened, the imagination could help students' minds open up for higher intelligence. So that's why I believe it's a need in the classroom. Thank you for your time.